everybody's falling silent all of a sudden. That probably means that we should get started. Let me welcome all of you very warmly to Carnegie Europe, our favorite foreign policy living room in Brussels. It's great that you're back here again for a discussion on NATO's southern flank. It's a great evening for this because it's also a football evening. And the eastern flank is playing the southern flank in tonight's quarterfinals. So we have, half of the NATO discussion also today on the football pitch. And Ana, who's sitting next to me here, is a great football fan, I was just told. And she's our guarantor tonight that we will actually end on time, because the closer we get to the 8 o'clock mark, the more nervous she will get, and she will just leave at some point, because something bigger and more important and strategically relevant is happening elsewhere. So that will be a huge disciplining force for us. So welcome again. First of all, I would like to say that this is for us a very important event, not only because Sinan has written a new paper for us, one that I think tackles one of the big strategic topics of the day for NATO, but also for Europe. But also it continues our work on NATO as a whole. So, stands in the tradition of Carnegie activity in this field, and it is our great pleasure, and I'm really thankful to NATO PDD, the Public Diplomacy Division, for bringing further guests tonight, and a few, folks that are attending, but also more importantly for supporting this undertaking by covering some of the production costs of the paper, the hard copy, and also giving us some of the food that you will be served after this event. People who have been here before with us know that, after the discussions on the podium end, we will remove this blue screen over there. Then we will have 2 minutes of chaos where all the chairs have to be removed. And then you are, most heartily invited to join us for some good, sturdy Mediterranean food tonight. So that's important as well. This is a discussion that happens just before the NATO summit. And it addresses, of course, apart from the strategic issues themselves that are playing out in the region, also the delicate balance inside the alliance, about finding that right kind of mix between the East and the South that has kind of emerged as one of the fault lines in the alliance, but that is needed to keep solidarity intact. And you can be of the opinion that the South is more important than the East, or you can be of the exact opposite opinion, but you can't really challenge the fact that you need to keep it in balance if you want to keep the alliance as one. And so, part of the discussion today, I think, will probably be about that as well. We have 4 speakers tonight. That requires extra discipline on our behalf. Sinan will start by introducing the key findings and recommendations that he has put into his paper. I hope that most of you have a hard copy in your hand. That's good. I can see that most of you do. And then we will have a few comments. I would like to ask Ambassador Ildem from NATO, the Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy, to start with comments from the alliance's side, his perspective. And then I move over to Ana Santos Pinto, and then after that to Professor Tsakonas, so that we have the full range of issues from scholars from the Alliance and from Carnegie here on the podium. I won't give, the endless lists of affiliations that my guests have and their previous careers, because everybody can read this. You have that in your invitation and documents. But let me just say a huge thanks to the 4 of you for coming here tonight and for filling us in on this. I have one more announcement to make, very important, and that is that you have found on your chair when you sat down this questionnaire. This is a customer satisfaction exercise that we're doing today. And it would be great if in the course of this event, probably towards the end, when you know whether this was good or not, you fill this in and you hand it in with our staff. Francesco, can you indicate very quickly where we are supposed to put these things when we have filled them out? Please drop them in a box at the entrance, so that we get an idea, what you really thought about this, after applauding us enthusiastically, of course, as you always do. Good. I think those were all of the announcements that I had to make here. I think we should just get started. Sinan, the floor is yours. Please give us the key findings of your great NATO paper.
Thank you, Jan. In deep water, sharks go after blood, and us think tankers go after tension. When we sort of try to decide about the issues that we're going to address, wherever there's tension, that's good material for us. And that's one of the fundamental reasons why I've tried to take this issue over the southern flank strategy for NATO, because there is tension within NATO about the southern flank, and more particularly about the balance between the eastern flank and the southern flank. There are two reasons for that tension. One is historical, because traditional NATO has been set up to deter and to provide for collective defense against an enemy, against a state enemy that's on the eastern side. So we already know the type of evolution within NATO that has tried to develop the policy responses to a rather well-known, if you want, source of tension in security matters. So NATO has really developed a strategy, capabilities, operational assets in order to address this particular tension. But the southern flank is rather different. When you look at the southern flank, the type of threat landscape that you see there is not a particularly NATO-suited threat landscape. Sometimes it's diffuse, sometimes it's murky, it's complex. And therefore, when you look at the traditional NATO, how NATO is evolved, the type of answers that was developed for the eastern flank challenge do not necessarily correspond to the type of answers and policy responses that either has been developed or would need to be developed for the southern flank. So that's the fundamental reason why I tried to develop and to draft this paper. The way that I have tried to do this is really to bring a sort of a matrix to solidify the type of analysis and the ensuing policy responses. The matrix, we can't project it here, but it's in the paper. It's a 2x2 box. The 2x2, where you have on one dimension the type of actors that are the source of this threat, whether they are state actors or non-state actors. Because one more time, one of the clear differences when we look at the eastern flank and the southern flank is the variety of non-state actors that is part of that threat landscape when we discuss the South. The other dimension is the security objective, whether we want to preempt or prevent these type of threats. And then the whole effort...
the alliance has not been great at finding the balance yet. Do you expect from this summit a correction of this? Do you expect, that there's even a chance to balance it out, or is this a futile exercise from the outset?
No, I think there has certainly been a number of developments since the Wales summit that tend to give us at least hope that in Warsaw there will be at least a component which will try to redress this balance. What are those developments? First, obviously, the emergence of Islamic State, with, we've seen most tragically in Istanbul 2 days ago. Secondly, Russia as a new actor in the southern flank, which I think is certainly not going to be temporary, but more where we have to look at it more as a permanent bastion in Syria. So these are, at least two considerations which will move NATO in the direction of redressing the balance. Now, concretely, what does that mean for the Warsaw Summit? I would tend to think that what we are likely to see is really at the political level an analysis of the situation and really an assessment that at the political level demonstrates that there is now an understanding that there is a need to focus more on the needs of the southern flank and the evolving threat landscape on the southern flank. Now, I don't expect in minute detail what this would mean operationally. But as we know from NATO's experience, at the end of the day, these summits are for building that political cohesion, for that political messaging. Then once the summit is over, the NATO momentum will carry this work forward and operationalize some of these policy aims.
Thanks, Sinan. Ambassador Ildem, you told me in our discussion before we met, before we came down here, that you've just returned from Georgia. So you were out there on the deep eastern flank to do some public diplomacy, I assume, with Georgian audiences who have their own expectations vis-a-vis this NATO summit, which will be disappointed. You heard Sinan about the skewed debate inside NATO, which you might see differently. You've also read his paper. Give us your initial comments on this and how you would react to what Sinan has just explained to us.
Well, first of all, I would like to thank Carnegie Endowment for this meeting, and Sinan, who I have known for so many years, and respect his intellectual capacity and all the deliverables with many papers in different subjects. And this one contributes a lot to our own discussions at NATO, although I must say that it is quite natural for every country belonging to certain region to promote its own priorities and expectations. But I can assure you that we don't feel that tension that you're referring to in our work. First of all, if I can say a few words about our expectations from the Warsaw Summit meeting, there is no doubt that the heads of state and government will be taking stock of what the achievements have been in terms of their decisions of 2014 at Wales Summit meeting. And there is a good story to tell to our publics that Readiness Action Plan was implemented, but it is not going to be only stock-taking exercise, but also to agree on a number of decisions. If I may put our expectations in two pillars. One is to protect our citizens. Citizens are in the core of our work, to provide better security for them and for the next generations. In order to do that, we need to further what Readiness Action Plan had provided us with strengthening and modernizing deterrence and defense, with additional means and capabilities. Yes, it is true that since the meeting is taking place in Warsaw, a country with an expectation to deal with threats coming from the east, and we will be seeing the decisions and announcements related to enhance forward military presence towards the east. Nobody can say that the threats coming from the south are neglected, and alliance would not be in a position to deliver on that. There will be definitely a framework in which we will enhance our capacity. First, in terms of elevating our situational awareness regarding what developments are taking place in the southern periphery. Second, to enhance our defense capabilities to deal with certain challenges. And third, projecting stability beyond our borders by working with those countries who are partners in the south to help them enhance their defense capacities. Sometimes there is a misperception. When we talk about deterrence and defense, it is as if we are talking only about threats coming from the east. And when we talk about projecting stability, it is primarily related to the south. When we talk about projecting stability beyond our borders, we should not forget that we are also aiming at increasing the capacities of those countries in the east, like Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, to deal with certain challenges. Now, if I go back to the south, you are right. In your paper, you have dealt with the complex nature of the threats emanating from the south. And we have there not only state actors, but non-state actors. Some non-state actors with state capacities. And it is not the known. In many instances, it is known unknown, and some domains it is unknown. Therefore, the challenge for the South is how we better streamline the alliance's own capabilities in dealing with different strands of activity, taking into consideration those threats and challenges, and also see the complex nature of these threats and join forces with other international organizations, the European Union in particular, in dealing with all these threats in the proper sense. With the European Union, we are working closely in terms of hybrid warfare, regarding all the challenges emerging recently. And we are expecting a joint statement in Warsaw by NATO Secretary General and EU leadership. When you take the threats and challenges of the South, we are talking about how to transform Operation Active Endeavor from Article 5 operation to non-Article 5 operation, dealing with, in the broader sense, the maritime security challenges. So I say that there may be a competition, but there is no tension. There are countries who are in the eastern flank contributing to the endeavors we are having in the south, and it is in show of solidarity. And I'm sure that NATO will come out of this summit meeting with expression of unity and cohesion, and also there would be political guidance to be followed up in the months ahead of us.
Thank you. I have a quick follow-up for you as well, because no tensions is great. We've learned there are no tensions inside NATO. That's good to know. Let's look at another source of tension, and that's, of course, money.
Yes.
Defense spending.
I was about to talk about this, but since the time was limited,
I have to press you a little more on this, because Sinan described to us, how diverse those challenges are in the South, and how they're not really NATO compatible in the traditional, way of thinking about NATO. So addressing all of these diverse threats is extremely expensive, because you have to plan for so many contingencies and for so many, comprehensive, scenarios that, it costs a lot of money. Now, the numbers are not really impressive, in terms of spending going up. So if you have no East-South divide, you might have, a spending problem inside of NATO, or is that also a misperception?
Well, I think we have to see the threats and challenges and how NATO is going to deal with them in a proper manner. Take, for instance, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction and ballistic missile threat. I mean, if you are going to take it as a real serious threat, you have to come up with capabilities. And this is what NATO has been doing with its ballistic missile defense project. And it is with a view to giving protection to all European allies from ballistic missile threats coming from those areas outside Euro-Atlantic zone. Therefore, I don't see that we are spending money in terms of the priorities or threats coming from different directions. And it will not be compatible with our claim that we focus on 360-degree security perspective. We have to be ready for all kinds of contingencies and threats to deal with in a serious fashion. On defense spendings, yes, Sinan briefly mentioned it. Since Wales' defense pledge, the numbers show that there is at least stop of decline and there is a gradual increase in defense spendings to meet the pledge of 2% of GDP. But the good story is that the 20% of the defense spending for new equipment, for defense investments, are growing high. So it is something that we should not lose sight of the importance of.
Thank you, Ambassador. Ana Pinto, you are from Portugal, an essential stakeholder on the southern flank, and you're a professor at the university, and you're also at various defense research institutes. Now, how do you assess what Sinan has written, but also what we've heard about, one of them saying there is not really a balance, others saying the tensions are actually much lower. How do you perceive that from where you are, and how much energy, is there in that summit from the Portuguese perspective?
I would like to thank you for the invitation, for being here. It's a pleasure to comment on Sinan's paper that is very, very interesting. And this is the first point that I would like to raise, is exactly when we talk about the tension or the gap between the South and the East. I don't know if it's exactly like that. It's not true that a country like Portugal or a country like Spain does not worry about what is Russia's role in Europe, or the perceptions or the action that is taking either on East or even on Syria. As I don't think it's true that Eastern countries does not worry with all the challenges that are raised in the paper on the South, being terrorism, weapons of mass destruction, the conflicts in the Middle East, and the question in Libya. All of us, with different levels, of course, have worries about these topics. And this is one of the points that I would like to raise regarding the paper, is that is an in-depth analysis of the Southern challenges. There are not challenges only to Southern European countries, are challenges to all the alliance. And this is the second point, is this paper reflects very clearly a dilemma that the allies and NATO have regarding North Africa and Middle East. For one side, we have a huge range of risks, threats, challenges, whatever we want to call it, of great complexity, different countries. It's not easy to divide sub-regions, North Africa, Middle East, Sahel, because they are interlinked in a very complex way with different actors, state actors, non-state actors. And from the other hand, not states, not organizations as NATO, have an effective answer for this. We have traditional instruments. We are used to a conventional way of responding to threats. That is why it's easier to activate instruments regarding the threats in the East, and not so easy to activate answers to the South. And if you ask to the different southern countries, being Portugal, Italy, Spain, they are going to have different answers about the instruments, or Turkey, they will going to have different answers about the instruments that should be applied to the situation. So these policy responses that are raised are very difficult to apply and be effective. When the alliance talk about promoting stability in our neighborhood, as the European Union also calls, it's very difficult to do that. and you can raise the objective, but how do you in practice you can have the policy orientations, but it's very difficult. And Sinan has a figure on the page 29 with the synthesis of the policy instruments, and you see a clear difference between a preemptive answer to state challenges and preventive answer to non-state challenges, because we don't really have now the capacity and capabilities to do that. And finally, I would like to highlight a last point that for me it's central for all the discussion that we are having in this time. That is the importance of the domestic political orders, and namely the populist movements that you do. I think this is very important because it goes to the core values of the alliance, of the Western democracies, and it's going to condition the answers, negotiations, capability of having consensus inside the alliance. And I don't think that we can foresee now the main consequences of these movements. We are beginning an election period in all of Europe and could have different results. But I think that the raising and the media images of this populist movement can have two consequences. The first is they're going to limit the definition of perception and challenges. They're going to try to influence foreign policy and defense policy and the way that these countries, each member country, each ally, it's going to manage their international role. And they also probably try to influence the alliances and the bilateral relations that the national states will have with other actors. And I think this, of course, can condition, influence the solidarity, the coherence of the alliance, and the core values of Atlantic Alliance. So I think we should be aware of this. It's a very good point to finish your paper as you do, because I think it's very, very important at this moment.
I think you just made a very elegant reference to hybrid warfare in an indirect way. Let me ask you one question. When you look at what's happening at the summit and striking that balance and also reinforcing the southern flank, if you were sitting in Moscow or in Riyadh or in Tehran or in any of these other places, would you be impressed by what you see?
Well, first I would be delighted with the tension and the division inside the alliance, because it's a good way to profit the tensions when you need unanimity to have the decisions. But secondly, I will probably be worried about the instruments and the way the answer could be given in the region. But the truth is, Russia intervention in the Syrian conflict changed the Middle East dynamics. Iran nuclear agreement changed the dynamics in the Middle East. Riyadh and Saudi Arabia are currently the third biggest spender in world military expenditure. So I think we need to be aware of this situation, and the heads of state and government inside the Atlantic Council should be aware that this situation could develop in different ways according political will, according commitments, according the way that we can answer to these challenges. And the perceptions, and I know that I talk a lot about perceptions because it's my topic, but perceptions are very important inside the alliances, inside the allies and each political communities, but also outside. And we should be aware of the consequences of the message that we send outside, and not only on East, on South, globally, but we should be aware of that consequences.
All right, thank you very much. Finally, Professor Tsakonas, you're a professor at the university in the beautiful island of Rhodes, and we brought you to the beautiful weather island of Brussels, and you have to forgive us for that, but we needed
There is too much humidity on both.
Now we need to move towards the eastern end of the southern flank, which I think you and your country and your government are very much concerned about. We just heard about the change dynamic because of Russia in the region, but before we maybe go a little bit deeper into that, give us a little bit of your assessment of what Sinan's paper told us, and how you predict this to be playing out at the summit and afterwards, perhaps even more importantly.
Of course, thank you very much. Thank you for extending this invitation to comment on a very well elaborated and very well researched paper written by Sinan. I would like to touch, due to time limit, I would like to touch upon two particular issues raised by Sinan's paper. One has to do with difference in threat perceptions, and the other has to do with synergies, which, in my view, are desperately in need right now for addressing the complexity of the threats ahead of us. There's a particular reference on Sinan's paper about the need for taking into account the divergent interests of NATO allies, which are guided by differences in threat perceptions. And from a Greek point of view, I would say that although to a large extent Greece is sharing the view that some of the challenges or security threats raised by Sinan's paper are indeed there. Actually, most of them are included in the list of Sinan's paper, such as hybrid warfare, state failure, violent extremism, proliferation of weapons of mass destruction. At the same time, it seems to me that some other issues of security challenges are not there, or are being interpreted in a way quite different from the one suggested from a mainstream point of view, I would say, of NATO, which has been carefully promoted or raised by Sinan's paper. And for example, there is a strong, I would say, example towards this direction. There is a reference in the paper that Russia's offensive capabilities, for example, starting from the deployment of Russia's 8.2 and 8D capabilities, or the Russia's Black Sea Fleet, intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance, cruiser deployment, and SS-26 Iskander ballistic missiles in Iraq, in Syria, I'm sorry, obviously should be viewed as detrimental to NATO security. It seems to me that this is not the case from the point of view, from a Greek analyst, if you look, like security analyst point of view. I doubt this is being shared by Greece as a bad thing to NATO's southern flank, to the extent this might work as a counterweight to, Russia's offensive capabilities, might act as a counterweight to Turkish national policies vis-à-vis Syria, for example. So it seems that there is a kind of a clash, I would say, in terms of perceptions within NATO that should be taken into account. Number two, synergies. I think Sinan has rightly suggested that there is a need for a comprehensive strategy should be developed on the part of NATO. At the same time, he mentioned that he made some suggestions about certain initiatives or actions NATO should take, mainly towards increasing capabilities, enhancing capacities, and investing in capacities. I strongly doubt this might be a way out for NATO managing to address the plethora of security challenges in Eastern Mediterranean, and particularly given the fact that those challenges and security threats are interlinked, are multidimensional. So I doubt that, to simply put it, NATO can go it alone, I would say. And I would suggest that a sophisticated, by all means, synergy with the European Union means and capabilities should meet somehow, so as to come up with a comprehensive strategy able to address some of those multidimensional means. Sinan has also mentioned that there is a need for, I think he openly suggested that there is a closer NATO-EU relationship is actually motivated by the changing security landscape, meaning that the current political framework should be revised somehow. I'll stop.
Great. Of course, I have a follow-up for you as well. And that has something to do with the usefulness of NATO. We have seen in the Syria case, and in the ISIS case specifically, when a NATO country like France has a security problem in the region, it didn't go to NATO. It actually went to the EU because it knew that they wouldn't stand in the way and they would basically let France do whatever it wanted to do. So if a country, if a key ally like France has a security problem in the region but doesn't go to NATO, what does this tell us about the usefulness of NATO on the southern flank?
Well, it does say a lot about how we should try to address, as I said, multidimensional threats, which is the case for now and for the years to come. The usefulness of NATO, I doubt has been questionable, or it is questionable by
Is questionable or is not questionable?
It is not. I doubt it is. I doubt it is. There are many reasons why NATO should remain in place and manage to come up with definitely much more sophisticated, more synergistic strategies for addressing a much more complicated environment. So what is mostly needed, I think, is try to come up with some ideas about how the available means, NATO means, should be used for managing to deliver, for addressing those threats. And differences in threat perception is a key issue towards that direction. I think we should all work towards eliminating or ameliorating, to a certain extent, that the division in threat perceptions, and how NATO allies are still assessing threats coming from the external environment.
Great. Thank you all very much for those introductory remarks and information. I now open it up to you. I hope that you have your questions ready. I'd like to take as many as we can. We have about 45 minutes for the debate, which is great. That gives us plenty of time. And I hope that you can give me a clear sign with whatever hand you have available at the moment. The first one is over here. I would like to collect perhaps 2 or 3. I hope that I get 2 or 3. Because if not, I have to invent them all myself. And that's not the purpose of this exercise. Maybe let's start with this one over here.
Thanks, Jan, and thanks to all the panelists for extremely thoughtful interventions and extremely timely, because a week tomorrow we'll all be in Warsaw trying to grapple with some of these issues. I'm Mel McNulty from the UK delegation to NATO. I'm not going to talk about Brexit, but I am going to talk about whether this paper, which could have been, which is extremely well done and, as I say, extremely timely, could have been retitled A Cooperation-Based Strategy for NATO's Southern Flank rather than a threat-based. I think we have touched on the idea that there's probably no shared threat assessment towards the Southern Flank, but are we looking not so much at a failure of response, but a failure of cooperation going back many years, which means that when the crises developed, there wasn't the basis of cooperation on which NATO could have responded much more effectively. Perhaps the contrast in the East is that NATO's record there has been one of cooperation, modernization, and bringing the defense institutions of the former Warsaw Pact up to NATO standards. The states on the southern flank, with one or two exceptions, Libya, Lebanon, Syria, are NATO partners. And perhaps more could have been done over these years, over these 20 years, when we were focused very much on capacity building and modernization in the East, to do that in the South, and perhaps would have given us a stronger basis for a cooperation-based response that would be so keenly needed now.
All right. Please get your questions ready. I think I'll let the panelists answer to this very specific one, and then we go into another round. Sinan, you want to go first on this one?
Two things. One, internal to NATO, and one in relation to NATO partners. Internal to NATO, I think one of the objectives of this paper is to basically raise awareness about the threat landscape, because that's the, in a way, that's the antecedent to a common threat analysis. Because we've expressed that one of the issues, and I think embedded in your question, is also an understanding that one of the barriers is that there is this different threat outlook among the allies. They don't see the things the same way. Their threat analysis is sometimes diverse. But how do you get to a common threat analysis? And one way to get to a common threat analysis is to do, I believe, this type of exercise when you look at the threat landscape out there and basically try to derive both, an analytical framework about what is happening, and then start talk about the policy response. And there, if there are divergences, then you deal with those divergences. But first you have to do this type of exercise, which has been done certainly within NATO, but perhaps pushing the frontier a bit is always useful. Now, on the cooperative side about the countries in the southern flank, there is a natural barrier to how much NATO can do, and that is that those countries, in the past, have proved extremely sensitive in areas that may impinge on their domestic security urge. And that's really been, one of the obstacles to developing further collaboration and cooperation with those countries. That's also been the case in relation to, how EU operates. But given that NATO has its own, there's a distribution of task and labor, even in areas where NATO operates, whether it's defense capacity building and training, so on, there has been that sort of resistance. Because of, in some countries especially, because of the special status of their security apparatus. So there is that resistance that, for instance, in Syria, you gave, the example of Syria. In Syria, the security apparatus and the special status of the security apparatus essentially precluded this type of deep cooperation with NATO, I believe.
Anybody wants to come in on this specific question? I have you, Ambassador, and then, okay, Ambassador van der Meulenbeker, please.
Thank you. Ambassador, you mentioned that on the forthcoming summit in Warsaw, there will be a review of the stock, what has been realized since the Wales summit in 2014. We'll have to wait another week in order to see that, but I wonder whether you could lift a bit of the veil and see what is better now in 2016 than in 2014, based on the statement on the promises of what has been made then. Thank you.
Well, in 2014, we were confronted with the aggressive actions of the Russian Federation by annexation of Crimea and aggressive actions in eastern Ukraine. Therefore, readiness action plan put in place with tripling the size of NATO's response force and having very high readiness spearhead force in the core of it, were all steps, measures that have been taken. And the heads of state and government, when they gather next week, they would be content with the implementation of those measures. But now, it is not only taking stock of these achievements so far attained, but also furthering it by strengthening deterrence and defense of NATO, which is to protect our citizens and also to project stability beyond our borders. If I may say a few words on the threats coming from the south, as you have dwelled upon in your paper, they are complex in nature. And in certain areas, NATO is not the first responder. Therefore, I agree with you, and I was alluding to it briefly, that we require such synergies to be in the center of our work in dealing with those challenges. And NATO-EU cooperation is one very good necessity to further it. I agree, in some countries, the perception, since we are talking about perceptions, perception of NATO might not be the very good one for us to operate. But when you take all the countries that we are right now cooperating, be it with Iraq, Jordan, Tunisia, it is a demand-driven process, and we are helping, assisting, and training them in specified areas of their need, and it adds to their capacity. Regarding the populist politics in the center of the shaping of the landscape in the future, it is a problem. But when you confront yourself with transnational threats, I mean, if there is a flow of migrants, refugees to your country, or there are a number of terrorist attacks in different capitals of allied countries, there is no way but to concentrate on the means and capacities that you have individually as a nation and through the organizations that you belong to. Therefore, the unfortunate incidents, the attacks taking place in different parts of NATO geography would force us to concentrate on ways to deal with these threats and challenges properly. I agree that NATO could not be the only organization to deal with it, and that's why cooperation with EU is becoming extremely important.
I always find that, interesting when that thing is mentioned, mantra, like how good it would be if the two could finally cooperate, knowing full well that this remains an unresolved issue, that, at the working level we have some good exchange, but at the top level that's not really possible in terms of a systematic approach. So I always count that as some sort of Brussels talk that never kind of really turns into something real. But that would be just this NATO-EU context for me is one of those big, stories that never quite get anywhere in this town.
Well, we should see it as a process. When I was serving here some 7 years ago, we were discussing NATO-EU cooperation, and I must say that now when I compare the cooperation between the two organizations with what we had then, there is an incredible progress for the better. We know the political impediments, and let us hope that finally there is a resolution to the long-standing Cyprus question, which would make NATO-EU cooperation in its full capacity. And if I may also take this opportunity, I, being at NATO, can feel the enthusiasm within NATO allied countries to further NATO-EU cooperation. And I just hear voices in different discussions that EU perhaps should be able to match this enthusiasm. And so it's a matter of mutual reinforcing effort, and that's why Warsaw Summit meeting, perhaps with this joint statement, could give a strong signal in that direction.
Can I just build something on this?
Yes, and then Professor Tsakonas.
Yes.
Yeah. Assuming Cyprus is resolved, that's certainly the first barrier. But that's not the only barrier. I mean, that's the superficial barrier. The real barrier to NATO-EU cooperation is differences among both EU allies and NATO allies about the task distribution, about what each entity should do and should not do. One interesting question is basically what will be the consequences of Brexit for that relationship. Because if the UK is not a EU member anymore, but obviously a NATO member, what does that mean for the future of the NATO-EU cooperation? Again, talking about the scenario where Cyprus is settled, so that the first obstacle on paper for that cooperation could be eliminated.
You are right on that. I mean, even Cyprus question is resolved, still there may be other impediments on the way, but what I can say is that there is a qualitative change since those years that I was in Brussels.
Well, just
Professor Tsakonas, yes.
very briefly. I assume we're all aware of the fact that High Representative Mogherini has released European Union strategic document a couple of days ago. So it's, I think, particularly for Carnegie Europe, it's a very good chance to come up with probably a study or organize a panel trying to see whether there are any overlappings or any possible paths of cooperation between the two organizations, given that there is now a way of moving forward based on that institutional document, which was not there. We've been expecting for it for some time now. It has been decided a year ago, but it has been released. And it seems that there is certain progress, at least with regard to the initiative taken by the European Union back in 2003, and then again back in 2008. There is some programs with regard to the threat assessment, the prioritization of threats in Europe's periphery, along with some suggestions about ways for possible collaboration between the European Union and other organizations, NATO being at the top, of course, of that agenda, and particularly of the transatlantic relationship. So it might be a good idea to, try to elaborate on.
Rest assured that we're working on it already. We'll be starting with a few blog pieces in the next couple of days, assessing the strategy, and then take it from there. I have a question. NATO-EU is one thing, and I want to leave that out of the equation for a while, because I think we actually, in essence, have bigger strategic fish to fry than this. Let me ask this to Sinan, who's a Turkish analyst, but also to our two professors. We had President Erdogan apologizing to Russia for the shooting down of the Russian fighter plane over Russian airspace, which was widely seen as a defeat for him and as a big victory for Russia, which has actually turned this incident now into a strategic victory for itself. Turkey will be less inclined to do a similar thing, to show that sort of resolve against violations of its airspace in the future. That doesn't necessarily make the southern flank more secure. Was this a strategic blunder, or is this just a footnote? Shooting down. Well, either way, you pick. You pick the one. Was the shooting down the mistake or the apologizing the mistake?
Well, I cannot, of course, speak on behalf of Turkey, but if I followed correctly, I understand that it is not a formal apology, but regret for the loss of life and readiness to alleviate the sorrow of the family of the victim. But I don't think that it was an apology for shooting down of the Russian aircraft.
It might not have been a formal apology, but it was a massive move on behalf of Mr. Erdogan compared to his initial reaction to the incident. Sinan.
Yeah. Just to follow up on Ambassador Ildem, there is definitely an adept use of constructive ambiguity here, which is fine if it's going to solve the problem. The Turkish interpretation is indeed, expression of regret and apology to the family of the pilot. But, the Russian statement is, yes, Erdogan apologized. So everybody speaks to their domestic audience, and, the Turkish government did it, even without the chain of command, because within 17 seconds you can't go up the chain of command. So it was a decision that was taken before, as per the rules of engagement. Now, could Turkey continue to, why did, Erdogan decide to nonetheless, sign an overture towards Russia? It's really because, essentially the country's foreign policy has been shaken to the core by some of the ill-considered attempts of the post-2011 foreign policy leadership. So the fact that the country finds itself isolated without the ability to establish alliances eventually led to a position that we had to reassess this foreign policy and start to make amends. So the first achievement was with Israel, the normalization of the relationship with Israel. And now with Russia, which also has an economic dimension because the Russian sanctions started to have an impact on Turkey and particularly on tourism. But more strategically, what does that mean? That the change from we're not going to go to the situation to the status quo ex ante. I don't see that. What was the status quo ex ante? The status quo ex ante was quite actually a remarkable achievement where Ankara and Moscow had deepened their relationship economically, on the energy side and so on, while they were disagreeing totally on everything beyond their borders. The outlook was, of course, very different on Ukraine, on Crimea, on Syria. But despite that, they were able to compartmentalize their differences and behave as if that hadn't existed. I think there won't be there won't be the possibility to do that anymore. So even though the relationship will gradually normalize, Ankara will remain more lukewarm towards Moscow. And so there is no going back to the period before the November 24th, which in a way, since we're a NATO panel, that should be good for NATO. And we are already seeing signs of that, for instance, on the Black Sea, where the Turkish traditional position has been, we don't want NATO in the Black Sea, and we're happy to cooperate with Russia on the Black Sea. That has fundamentally changed. So, Turkey is more receptive to NATO on the Black Sea now, with the caveat being that there are, constraints with the Montreux Convention and so on.
One question over here.
Could we respond on that as well?
Of course. I mean, I think to the same question,
Yes.
please respond now. If you hold on for just a minute or so,
Just
because I
very
would like to
briefly.
finish this question first.
I agree with the analysis made by Sinan. Your initial question was whether that initiative taken by Erdogan would contribute to the stability of the southern flank of NATO. I think it will. I mean, that's a starting point for better relations. It should have been done. I think it came a bit late, but it is an initiative taken towards the right direction. And I think it's, to a certain extent, lessons learned by the initial mismanagement of the situation immediately after the incident, when Turkey, to a certain extent, has tried to get NATO involved in what has been happening in the area. For example, by calling for the activation, reinvigoration of Article 5, which was not the case for NATO. NATO did not respond to that.
Didn't ask for Article 5.
No, there was no request for that.
Oh, okay. I thought there was probably some thinking released by the government towards that direction. But anyway, either a tendency or a fact, it seems that Turkey at the time was interested in having NATO involved somehow in that, I would say, incident. So the way things evolve now, it seems to me that they do contribute to the stability and to the further normalization and stability of NATO's southern flank.
Thank you. Please introduce
Thank
yourself
you
in a
very
short
much.
question.
Yeah, about...
Please introduce yourself.
Mohammed Rajai Barakat. Don't you think about Russia and Turkey? Don't you think that Turkey is trying to make pressure on EU so as to accelerate the negotiations for the addition, trying to have good relations with Russia? Maybe it's going to make European Union a little bit anxious about these relations and to accelerate the negotiations, because the declarations yesterday about these negotiations, and don't you think that it's possible? And about Libya, you spoke about threats from Saudi Arabia, and nobody's speaking about Libya now. Don't you think that it's a threat also for NATO, what's happening there? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Who wants to go first on these two? Libya, a case for NATO, and then, Russia's pressure after the Turkey incident.
Well, I'll answer the first, perhaps, part of the question. I don't think that, the Russia issue is any relevance for the Turkey-EU relationship, at least for the foreseeable future, because there will always be impediments to how close Turkey and Russia can become. Turkey is a NATO partner. Obviously, Russia is not. There can be no real strategic relationship between Turkey and Russia. The Turkey-Russia relationship can never really be an alternative to the Turkey-EU relationship. So I think that card, if there are people who believe that that's the case, I think that's the wrong way to approach the Turkey-EU relationship.
Anna, you wanted to come in as well.
Yes, and I use also the Libyan example. I don't think there is a pressure. Today they open one more chapter on the negotiations between EU and Turkey. And I think there are many things, many issues that pressure EU and Turkey relation, and not specifically the relation with Russia. And even though on the Middle East alignments, Turkey has a very close relation with Saudi Arabia too, and all this is mainly on the region more than with the EU, where many other questions and problems will pressure. But on Libya, the paper debates on Libya and talks about that challenge. In Portugal, we pay attention to Libya in the last 5-6 years, And it's very surprising for me that everyone is trying to avoid the elephant in the room, even inside NATO, and I'm sorry for the expression, but we know that we have a problem. We acknowledge that problem for individually each of us, but we don't debate because we don't know what to do. And I think Libya is the problem and will be the problem in the near future. On the Portuguese case, we passed from one main supplier of oil and one of the countries in the North Africa where we invest a lot on construction, a lot on the Portuguese economy dimension, that is not so much, but it's important for us on engineering and construction. And today, we all know that Libya is a chaos, and we don't really see that topic discussed. We talk about a probable coalition of states, operations, something that we don't know what it is, but it's a huge problem, and I don't know if NATO is the first responder on this topic regarding this story.
Well, I cannot talk whether NATO is first responder or not, but NATO definitely, in its considerations, keep Libya as a very important country in the region, and when there is a request and need, we would be considering ways how to assist the country in defense capacity building and strengthening it. Therefore, Libya is not something that we put aside and not paying attention, but it depends on the circumstances and the way NATO would be asked to make its contribution.
Thank you. I have another question to you, Ana, but also to the rest of you. One of the other big elephants in the room in this entire context, of course, is the US. On the eastern flank, we have this discussion among countries on that eastern flank that, are very much looking at Washington for, also bilateral reassurance. And they're sometimes questioning to what extent Washington is still dedicated, to live up to its security and defense commitment. Is there a similar sentiment of US absence or engagement on the southern flank? Is that very much the focus? How is the US position on all of this perceived? Is it seen as a reliable partner? How would you assess this from your perspective?
Well, if you look to the article of Foreign Affairs of General, missing the name right now, the previous commander for Europe of NATO, you see that there is a huge argument on the eastern perceptions and worries, and that is, of course, very important and in a certain way makes clear what is United States' position. Regarding the Mediterranean and on the southern flank, of course, United States, for stability reasons and for security, have worries, but probably they think the main burden sharing should not be from the United States. Leading from behind is the first sentence, but I think that the situation could be solved with other instruments beside the southern shore of NATO. And in the NATO, we are talking on the NATO framework. I think Eastern is more worrying and more bilateral contacts with each allies that the South, I think. But it's a worry, of course, because what happened in the South, all list of challenges that are well perceived in the paper are on the top of the list of worries of the United States, of course.
Yeah, I was just about to say, if you say that, people think that the US expects the Europeans to actually, pick up the tab themselves, then they might be in for a big disappointment, and that, could in the end lead to strategic uncertainty on the southern flank. And that would be a big concern, I guess.
Yes, let me just say that the global strategy, the European global strategy that was, and words matter, just welcomed by the Council of the European Union, is the worst timing ever for a document like that to be publicly released and discussed. So we can now make all our strains in debates and panels about that, but I doubt that that document that could be very useful, this timing is just suicidal for the document.
Why exactly?
Because we have the Brexit, well, regarding security and defense, if the UK leaves EU as such, we lost the biggest budget for defense, the biggest defense industry, and we need to reshape that. And global strategy with UK or without UK, I think it's different. It's the biggest development aid sponsor. So we need to reshape things if we want to be credible outside. And in this line of thought, of course, that United States want the burden sharing, responsibility sharing, but the Europeans also need to think clearly, and I don't know if the European Union is going to do that debate. I'm fearing that will not. What is going to do with this external action? It's going well on humanitarian and probably on development, etc. But we have a problem on security or defense. And I'm not so positive on that development after the Brexit, but I'm probably wrong.
Anybody else wants to come in on the US questions?
Well,
First you, and then we have another question from the audience.
I think the United States has been much more receptive, at least with regard to, compared to the European Union, on the geostrategic reasons, or the implication for geostrategic reasons in case there is a loss of Greece. I mean, I'm talking on the part of Greece. So it was important, I think it's still important for the United States to assure that there is a stability in this particular part of the world, and to make a linkage with what has already been said about the ability of the two states, Greece and Turkey, to work together for creating, I would say, a common narrative with regard to external threats, a narrative that would manage to re-establish in a way the geostrategic linkage of the Greek-Turkish airspace for NATO's for better serving NATO's purposes and for addressing the security challenges in the area which seem to be common for Greece and Turkey. I think this is probably the way forward for both countries and for NATO as well. So focusing on common friends to I would say NATO's or collective security interests is probably one of the issues we have to focus on.
Thank you very much. We have one more question.
Let me
Oh,
just-
sorry. Anna wanted
One
to come in, and then
sentence.
Sinan, and then we get to your question.
One
please.
sentence, I forgot it's something very important. Who is going to be the next president of United States and on this cooperation, of course. Forgot the most important.
All right, Sinan, then
Again, very briefly,
Ambassador.
if I had drafted a paper on the eastern flank, it would have been unavoidable for me to reference the US. It was not for the paper with regard to the southern flank. I don't think I referenced the US even once in this paper. That already tells you that the type of responses that need to be developed for the eastern flank are different. We're talking about reassurance, we're talking about deterrence, where the US role is unavoidable. You can't escape that. The response to the southern flank are, a hybrid or a myriad of different, more flexible response, if you have to use that analogy, type policy initiatives. There you don't necessarily need the US. Of course, it would be invaluable to have the US on board contributing, but it's not as unavoidable as the eastern flank, and I think the paper reflects that.
just to clarify, is the US less interested or is it less needed?
Both.
Is that a reason for worry?
It's a reason for being more, more focused on what needs to be done on the southern flank, because you can't expect US leadership on the southern flank. You may have more higher expectations on the US regarding eastern flank, and they're already delivering.
Ambassador Ildem.
Well, of course, I have to inject some sense of fairness since the United States is very much aware of the challenges emanating from the South and making as much contribution as it has been doing for those challenges coming from the East. But the particularities and nature of threats and challenges we are facing from the South would also require, as you have referred to, different flexible arrangements. But in any case, when it comes to NATO's role and contributions, the United States is in the forefront to make its contribution and to have NATO's contribution to be robust.
I think we have one final question from the audience.
My name is Germano Dottori. I came from Rome, Italy. So you could expect I would like to take the floor a bit to talk about Libya, because I was impressed by what you said about your question on the absence of United States and how it's perceived. As an Italian, I don't want to unveil any state secret, but it was for months that the Obama administration asked Italy to take the lead of a military operation of stabilization on Libya, just to discover that Italy didn't have the strength required for such an ambitious endeavor. Problem is right that if we want to project stability or to bring stability to large countries in very big turmoil, we as European states, member of NATO, simply don't have any more the means. So if we want to project stability also contemplating the use of force, probably in the near future we will need a sort of land rearmament. Most of the European countries decided after the fall of the Berlin Wall to get rid of the tanks, for instance. How you can go to Libya without tanks? When, for instance, just the Misurata Brigade possess some 800s among tanks and armored vehicles of various sites. So it's very important, in my opinion, that the United States change this attitude of the staying behind, because otherwise we are going to pay a very high prices, at least as contribution given by state funds to the military expenditures. I would like also to add a sort of consideration and a question. Projecting stability, I think we should be very clear about what we want to mean with this concept, because the risk is high that we confuse projecting stability with supporting the status quo. And if there is a very strict indifference between what the United States and Russia have done in the last years, it's just like that. The Russians entered Syria after a very important address by President...
Please come to your questions very quickly.
Yes, I am right. President Putin at the General Assembly of United Nations proposed Russia as a champion of global stability. I think that projecting stability in the meaning of NATO is much more meaning accommodating change. Is that true or I'm wrong?
All right. That last question gives us the chance to give the word to everybody here again very briefly. We have reached our time limit, but I would still ask you, all of you, to have a final comment perhaps on this question or on anything else that comes to mind. I would start with...
Fine.
You're fine on that side, then Ambassador Ildem, and then Sinan, and then...
I understood you correctly. You were asking whether we want to impose a change, right?
Accommodating change, intervening just to help people to get stability after disorder has broken up.
Well, think what we have to understand is that NATO tries to deal with those challenges and threats in such a way, not only by having its own capabilities, but also working with those countries in the southern periphery, and we are talking about partners of NATO, to make sure that they have enough capacity, resilience to deal with the threats and challenges, so that those challenges and threats could not become major threats for NATO countries. So it is, in fact, helping them by assisting, advising, and training in those areas that they wish NATO's contribution to be in place.
Anna, please, and then finally with
just a short comment again on perceptions. When we heard stability, all of us were going to think on different things. I don't know what NATO is thinking about stability. Mr. Ambassador, as explained, probably someone in North Africa and Middle East will going to think differently on what is expecting on stability. One thing I can bet it's on their mind. It's stability for NATO allies and not for them. I don't know what's going to be resolved, but I think when we use these kind of expressions, we should think about what the others have on the dictionary in the same words.
Sinan, finally.
I think when you look at the, eventually at the role of NATO in relation to your question, NATO is at the receiving end of the international governance. It's not leading the international governance. So if I understand you correctly, whether, when you have this dichotomy between stability and change, in an environment where, as you paint, NATO should intervene, the decision is taken, there's only been one instance where NATO intervened without UN Security Council resolution, right? Even Libya, there was a UN Security Council resolution. So in that sense, the question is more a question of international governance and UN Security Council than NATO, because NATO has only once taken the lead in a way because UN Security Council was blocked on Kosovo. So I don't see that being replicated in the foreseeable future. So in that sense, the question is a very relevant question. But practically, NATO will be at the receiving end of whatever consensus emerges.
Thank you very much. I hope that we can discuss, or continue rather, the discussion afterwards. You're all invited to join us now after a quick, moving away of the chairs, for dinner. I would like to thank my panelists for trying to cut through the fog of what is conceptually, a very difficult terrain for NATO, a very different environment. One that is fraught by many, many things, and where NATO, in its limited mandate, needs to kind of, work very hard to find its proper space. I hope that we were able to provide a little bit of information and guidance on the issue. I would like to thank all of you also for your patience and for your questions. And please fill in the questionnaires right now and drop them in the box over there. This gentleman is holding the box at the far end of this room. Provide him with the paper that he needs. And thank you all very much for coming to Carnegie. We'll be inviting you again soon. Have a great evening.